Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer, with you guys today. And today's small session, I won't spend too much time on this, is on the Virgo full moon that's approaching any time now. It's actually the 19th of February for me at around about lunchtime. 2019, and the full moon is kicking in tomorrow pretty much. Now obviously that varies depending on which part of the planet you're on, so you need to, it'll be 19th and 20th essentially. Okay, now my take on this hopefully will be different to what is out there already, because I'm actually noticing, paying a lot of attention to the goddess power, goddess energy, and goddess signatures that are shining very strongly through this full moon. They are not easy energies, and I will point to what they are and what they potentially describe on an archetypal level, and hence some of the issues that they might bring up for you guys. They certainly have brought up stuff for me, which has been very interesting and very, very challenging as well. And it's all got to do with relationships, your own needs, your emotional needs, and your voice, being able to communicate what you need in a relationship and in a partnership. Now, the full moon is in Virgo, so that alone brings in various themes and characteristics which we'll talk about. But I guess let's just jump straight into it, and let's bring up the chart. Okie dokie. So here is the chart for the full moon. Now this is done for Melbourne, Australian Eastern Standard Time, which happens to be on the 20th of February, 4:34 a.m. here in Melbourne, where I am. As I said, it can vary depending on where you are on the globe. Okay, so wherever you are, this is, just a moment, let me just rectify that. So I'm using Solarfire, and Solarfire has this feature, which is my favorite feature. You can animate the chart and you can skip forward and skip back by seconds, minutes, days, weeks, hours, years, months, etc. It's wonderful. So you can see here the moon is at 2 Virgo, so we want to take it back to 0 degrees of Virgo. And if we want to get really technical, we want to fast forward. As you can see, I'm fast forwarding 1 minute at a time. You can see up here that the moon is moving just in minutes. Now the sun's at 0 degrees 42 of Pisces, and we want to get the moon exactly opposite that point. So here we go. So it's actually 1:54 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. So there's the moon at 0 degrees of Virgo, 42 minutes. And there is the sun at 0 degrees Pisces of 42 minutes. Okay, so this is a regular full moon, as in it's not an eclipse, okay, as in a full moon eclipse. It's a regular full moon, which we have pretty much every month. The interesting thing about this particular full moon is that everything else that's sort of happening in the sky as well at the moment is incredibly powerful. You know, we have Mars went into Taurus just a few days ago, and as it entered 0 degrees of Taurus, it was conjunct Uranus, which it still is. But the point being that when it entered Taurus, it was carrying with it that Uranian energy with it. And Uranus is going to go into Taurus very soon as well, as most of us know. That's not too far away at all. So we have this combination of energy, which is a very powerful energy in terms of our own path of individuation, waking up, taking charge, taking action towards our own individual and path of individuation. Now, because it's in Taurus, Mars is in Taurus, it is very tied into survival, self-reliance, worth, inner worth, consolidation, inner resources. This is all the Taurus energy. So there's something that we need to really step into over the next few weeks while Mars is in Taurus around those sorts of issues. We may be confronted with issues where we just have to stand on our own 2 feet with regards to stability and resources and so forth. Mars in Taurus is in its detriment in terms of rulership, essential dignities and abilities. So it's not a strong Mars in that sense, but whatever the case, Mars still will do its thing, whatever sign it's in. And in Taurus, it's very, very stubborn. It may want to not take that sort of responsibility for the self, for total self-reliance. It might be really stubborn about those sorts of issues. But we just have to step into that energy. We have to do that. And the Uranus there adds a very strong component of intuition coming through. And it's a disruptive energy as well. It can be quite unpredictable in terms of the circumstances and events that can transpire. This energy in the wrong hands can be very dangerous because it's quite erratic. And Mars is the planet of aggression, fire, war, conflict. So you put Mars and Uranus together, and there has been, quite a few events in the world that have taken place that I think are very characterized by that Mars-Uranus energy. But on an individual, personal level, it's our own will forces, our own conscious ego desires, because Mars connects to our conscious desires, whereas Pluto connects to our unconscious desires. So that Mars in Taurus with Uranus is a very tricky combination and needs to be handled with consciousness and awareness and care, or it can be incredibly disruptive and abrupt and erratic. So it'd be interesting to hear how that has sort of transpired for you guys. So we have that combination there that's really illuminating what's happening in the energy of this full moon chart. Now, with the full moon in Virgo, we have, the sun in Pisces. So we always take into account the sun as well. The full moon is only a full moon because it's opposite the sun. So this polarity, this energy of Virgo Pisces is very heightened, very highlighted during this full moon. Now, the polarity of Virgo and Pisces is so interesting. It's really a polarity that speaks to the human imperfections, if you like, versus the divine oneness and perfection of all things, the divine source of oneness to all things, the source to all things. That's the Pisces energy. So, we're dealing with this polarity of, on the one hand, there can be an incredible sense of spiritual desires in terms of wanting to purify the soul, as it were, to purify spiritual components of your life. On the other hand, it can also be a lot of confusion or disillusionment or really idealistic undertones of what one is expecting during this full moon as well. And what adds further to that is that we have, if you look down here, don't worry about the location of the houses because it'll be different, in every single location, right? So this is based in Melbourne. So don't worry about where everything is. But what we want to be looking at is the planetary aspects. So we have a Sun-Mercury conjunction, which is actually active as of today, being the 19th of February, and this chart is for the 20th, so it'll be active for a couple of days. And, you know, Mercury in Pisces is very tricky Mercury. You know, at best, it can be creative writing, poetry, music, beautiful creative expression, and openings psychically to spiritual dimensions, into your own spiritual mind, as it were. And Neptune certainly adds to that as well, extremely, actually. But on a basic sort of level, on a mundane level, this Mercury-Neptune conjunction can really be the source of disillusionment, disappointment, and mixed communications. You know, you can. I basically, what I would recommend when you've got a Mercury-Neptune conjunction in Pisces is do not put yourself in a position where you are signing any legal documentation. Any written or verbal contractual agreements can be really, really obscured at a time like this. So if you're in a position where you need to make some kind of agreement, try and put it off if you can. If you can't, then you really need to make sure that you get you know, second and third person even involved in having a look into what it is you're actually agreeing to, because it can be the case of what you're actually perceiving through this Mercury in Pisces conjunct Neptune is so idealistic, and it can easily fool you into seeing something that's actually not there. So just keep that in mind. And on a level of just basic communication between yourself and your loved ones or friends or whomever, just keep in mind that there's a lot of sensitivity at the moment. There's a lot of idealism. There can be a lot of disappointment because what one person says and the way you interpret it and vice versa will end up being quite different in the reality, you know, in even a few days' time or a week's time, where you'll see what was discussed or what was exchanged, and you'll see it from a much different perspective, and it can leave you feeling disappointed. Pisces energy, when we are not able to see the truth of what's there, the experience ends up being pretty deep disappointment, because we had such high ideals and expectations of something or someone. In this case, it could be of what somebody said to you or says to you, or you say to somebody else. And it just does not turn out to be what you thought, what you believed, what you hoped for. So just watch that energy. And that's part of this full moon chart as well. The other thing is Chiron has ingressed into Aries, and I'm going to do a separate video for this particular ingress because I feel it deserves a discussion just on its own. But just to bring it into today's subject, it is part of this full moon energy as well, because Chiron has ingressed back into Aries. Now, it entered Aries, you know, last year sometime, but just for a very short while. So it gave us a tiny little taste, almost like, you know, just lifting the curtain up slightly, ever so slightly, and just getting a little glimpse of the Chiron in Aries. But not enough for us to really get a feel or really establish a connection to what this might mean for us individually and collectively. So now that it has ingressed back into Aries and will be there for the next 8 years, this is a very, very crucial, significant cycle in time and in this time of history, collectively and personally. And in a nutshell, it's really about healing our own core identity. This is going to be huge for the next 8 years. But I'll leave that for another video, as I said. However, it is worth mentioning for this full moon chart because it's just part of the energy of this full moon. Now, we've also had Saturn and Venus forming a conjunction. Now, Venus has moved past Saturn, so she's only just moved past Saturn because Venus does move very quickly. But for the last few days, there's been a build-up of this Saturn-Venus conjunction, which is not easy at all. Even though Saturn is in rulership in Capricorn, Venus doesn't do, in terms of dignity and debility, it doesn't do anything in Capricorn. But Saturn-Venus aspects are really, really very, very challenging when it comes to relationships, when it comes to what your needs may be in a relationship. So there's probably been some separations that have occurred. On the other hand, there might have been more of serious sort of conversations or serious decisions made around the matter of relationships as well as finances as well. But separation seems to be the more common experience, the more typical experience. So I wouldn't be surprised if people have separated. That could be literally divorcing, ending a relationship, or just even separating short term, or if you're living in the same house, you might have, slept in different rooms for a while. There's a number of different ways this can really manifest, but there is some essential experience of cutting off, separation taking place. And Venus is building up now to working her way towards Pluto. So there'll be further intense energy with Venus once she gets close enough to Pluto, which she's practically there anyway. So there's a sense of this energy already brewing. But in a few days' time, when she's right next to Pluto, there's likely to be some kind of ending, some completion. On the other hand, it could also be a total regeneration of a relationship that you're in, or a certain component of the relationship finds its way to be able to transform. So, every planetary energy has a dual sort of nature, if you like. It has so many different layers to it, and the way it's going to manifest for you is impossible for me to say without knowing you, without speaking to you, without looking at your chart, etc. So I always just try and give, a few different layers and levels of how it might manifest. So there's some tricky stuff going on with relationships, really these last few weeks and the next couple of weeks moving ahead. And what adds to this even more in terms of this full moon chart, so I just want to get back to that and really now start discussing what I started to say at the beginning, that this full moon is very engaged with the goddesses. Now, first of all, the moon is a goddess herself. She's the lunar goddess. She's the light of the sky, of the night sky, to be more specific. So, very quickly, just to recap, the full moon, we know it always stirs things up. The lead up to the full moon stirs things up as well. There's just this built up, of emotion that starts to, it's just all these waves, just flowing within us, right? The moon, and this is a supermoon as well, so it's fairly close to the earth, in other words. And as I've said many times before, our bodies are made up of 80% of water. So these full moons, they do stir up the ego, they do stir up the unconscious, and they stir up the emotional body. And when things are challenged or denied or suppressed, then the full moon just basically shines the light on what needs to be seen. So a full moon can be a really powerful experience on a number of different levels. It can be a powerful experience in that it brings greater awareness and illumination to a situation that maybe you don't really want to see, but the full moon makes you see it. You got no choice because she just lights it all up. So it can be on the level of where we're not wanting to deal with things, but something comes into our consciousness, into our awareness, which can be a struggle. It can be a crisis. And because the full moon is in Virgo, it is critical. Virgo is a very critical sign. Virgo is what I call ego denial. Now, I've done a couple of videos on this subject, and I might just pop the links below this video so that you don't have to try and find them. They are worth watching because what I discuss is Virgo, the 6th house, equals ego denial. The Scorpio house, which is the 8th house, equals ego death. And the 12th house, which is the Pisces house, equals ego surrender. It's worth understanding those concepts in terms of the function of the ego throughout these archetypes, because the ego in house 6, 8, and 12 is the most complex. So understanding that function of the ego through those signs in those houses is crucial to understanding what's happening in these 12 signs, what's happening when the moon is going through all these signs, when the sun is going through all these signs, etc. So the moon in Virgo is quite a critical energy. It can bring up a lot of crisis, and because it's a full moon, it's likely to do that. Obviously, the full moon in Virgo connects to matters of self-improvement. Because it's ego denial, it's really about looking at where is it in your life that you need to, I don't like to say perfect things, because no one or nothing is perfect, because if it was, or if we were, there'd be no need for us to be incarnate in these physical vessels, these physical bodies on this physical earth plane. We're here because we are constantly evolving and growing. So these crises that come up, these challenges, our life story, all the various chapters, the cycles, all the things we go through, we're not being punished. We are simply given an opportunity to grow and evolve and become more conscious. That is the case always. But it is our own ego that struggles with that. And so the ego essentially tries to deny, suppress, ignore, or think it's above, anything, really. The ego is insatiable with feeling good about itself, right? So the ego has nothing invested in becoming conscious, as it were. The ego doesn't want to experience any suffering or pain. It basically just wants to feel good. That's the nature of it. It's the soul, which is Pluto, and the ascendant, these driving forces that are working sort of behind the scenes. It is when we are able to align that ego and that soul energy, align them together, we can actually become more conscious of what it is that's going on in our life and why, and what choices we need to make, etc. So the moon in Virgo is a very critical place, and it is a full moon, so it's going to bring up a lot of stuff that's been bubbling inside. And the other thing is, look back to a couple of weeks ago where we had the new moon. The new moon was in Aquarius, around about 15 degrees of Aquarius. That's connected to this full moon, right? Very different signs. One's a new moon, one's a full moon. But whatever started around about 2 weeks ago is going to find its way as an undertone through this full moon energy and everything this full moon is describing. So if you have a look over here where I'm hovering my cursor now, this is Aries, and she's in Sagittarius. And if you have a look down here, we can see Juno in Gemini. Now, these are the two goddesses that I was referring to earlier. Well, there's three because one is the moon. So we have the moon, Ceres, and Juno, and the Sun, which is a masculine energy. But these three energies up here, the Moon, Ceres, and Juno, are all feminine principles. They are part of the feminine function in our psyche, both in men and in women. Now, these two asteroids, Juno and Ceres, are the main two, in my view and in my opinion, that are really powerful when it comes to forecast or prediction. The other asteroids are very powerful in their own right and weave their way through the narrative of your chart or my chart or anybody's chart. But when it comes to prediction and transits, it's they're not as transparent to a degree. Now, it depends which asteroid we're talking about because there's thousands of them. But in terms of the main ones that I work with, are Vesta, Ceres, Juno, and I also pay attention to Pallas Athena. There she is up there. But forget about Pallas Athena for now, and of course, never forget Black Moon Lilith. She's a force to be reckoned with, that goddess. You don't mess with her. I have her conjunct Pluto opposite my Venus in my own chart. So Lilith is a very prominent energy in my life. And that's played out in some very interesting ways, which is another story unto itself. Ceres is a very prominent asteroid in my own chart, and it has been the source of the deepest suffering and pain, which has been, lifelong, really. And Juno is also very prominent in my chart because she's also connected to my Venus and Pluto and my Lilith. So anyway, these asteroids in this chart are speaking through this full moon because they are both forming a square to this full moon. So this full moon, for me, is a real goddess energy, power, a voice trying to speak through, because Juno is in Gemini, and Juno just recently went into Gemini. So Juno through Gemini for the next couple of months, she'll be there actually, is going to bring up matters in all partnerships and relationships, the issue of communication and being heard, and feeling very, very strongly about being heard and being listened to, and being able to use your voice to speak and communicate. And when you're not being heard and respected, when you're not being listened to, it brings up this fire in your belly. Literally, it's like this fire, volcanic kind of energy that will eventually come through the words, because Juno's in Gemini. So the fire, which ends up being conflict and anger, will come through words, right? So now the reason I say that is because Juno, just a quick overview, Juno was the wife of Zeus, Jupiter. She was the queen of heaven. And she was in a very unhappy marriage with Zeus or Jupiter because of his infidelities, purely and simply. So she was always angry at him because he was always running off with somebody else, essentially, in a nutshell. And when Juno was discovered as an asteroid, astronomically, scientifically, she was in the sign of Aries, which is very apt because it really describes her pathology, her archetypal pathology, that she was the angry wife. So Juno, therefore, is so prominent when it comes to assessing partnerships and relationships and marriage, and the main issue being fairness and equality and justice. And if you're feeling that you're in a partnership that is not equal, that is not balanced, that is not fair, where there's injustices occurring, then the Juno in your chart is going to basically fire up. So Juno will speak that story through your chart, depending on where she is. Now, she might be very happily placed in your chart, which would make, things a lot easier. But if she's frustrated through stressful aspects, then this is going to be quite a strong theme in your relationships. So in terms of this full moon, she's forming a square to the moon, and Ceres is forming a square to the moon, and Juno is forming an opposition to Ceres. So these three archetypes are basically speaking to our emotional needs and security, our ability to be heard and listened to in partnerships, relationships, and marriage. And Ceres in Sagittarius is bringing in that element of it. Well, Ceres is the primary nurturing principle other than the moon. Now, Ceres, in summary, is the myth of Persephone and Ceres. Ceres was the mother of Persephone. Persephone was abducted by Pluto, and Ceres was basically mostly in grief and mourning throughout her existence as a result of her daughter being abducted. So Ceres denied the earth crops, food, which is why Ceres connects to the nurturing principle. So when Ceres goes wrong in a birth chart, in other words, when she's aspected in very difficult ways, very stressful ways, there is something about the nurturing principle that fails the individual, and as a result, they can experience separation from family, separation from mother or father, and it can then go into the sphere of nourishment of the body. So all eating disorders, for example, and digestive issues as well have to do with Ceres. So just want to have a look at something here. So Ceres in Sagittarius is the nurturing principle experienced through freedom and meaning, all right? We need Sagittarius, freedom, meaning. If there's no meaning and no sense of freedom, we don't feel nurtured. That's what Ceres in Sagittarius in a nutshell means. The failure to have that sense of freedom and meaning and purpose through what nurtures you leads a person to believing that life is meaningless, basically. Now, the moon squaring Ceres is going to bring up the issues of your own needs around freedom versus family. This is a very important theme in this full moon chart. So there will be a number of you that will be experiencing these sorts of issues at the moment. I personally have actually experienced them myself in the last couple of weeks leading up to this full moon. So Ceres and the moon, two nurturing principles, are squaring each other, right? So the primary nurturing principle is being really stressed at the moment, really challenged. And it's about your own needs versus the family. So if you're a parent, for instance, and you've got children, maybe you've got very demanding children, maybe you've got one demanding children, maybe you've got a demanding partner, whatever the case may be. It could be a sibling, a demanding sibling, wanting you to nurture them, wanting you to take care of them, and it's at the cost of your own emotional needs. These are the sorts of issues that can come up. And the moon squaring Juno is your own emotional needs versus the partner's needs, versus the relationship needs. So there's some tension and stresses and conflicts and crises of these sorts of matters that come up very, very strongly as a result of this full moon. Naturally, this will all start to dissipate, in the next few days, but this can be a really hot period for these issues to come up. It's all about the divine feminine, really, because we're talking about Juno, the moon, and series 3 goddesses in all very stressed out to one another through this full moon chart, therefore highlighting what the conflicts and stresses and challenges may be. Now, that may sound negative, but it's a fact. It's just what these energies can produce. And let's keep in mind that when there is stress, when there is conflict, when there is crisis, usually what follows is some kind of resolution, right? So allow this energy to bring up the issues that it needs to bring up for you in order to hopefully find resolution and correct what needs to be corrected. That's what I see this full moon really speaking through. The other thing about full moon in Virgo is that, you know, there can be that, the inner critic, you know, comes through very, very strongly. Because Virgo, at worst, can be incredibly critical of themselves and of the world at large. Everything they see is through this critical eye, which at times can be very functional and productive because it enables the person to work harder at something in terms of their own self-improvement. But at worst, it can be just beating oneself up, never feeling good enough, never feeling perfect enough. So that energy is very strong through this full moon. So matters around self-improvement are quite highlighted. Matters of purification of the body, mind-body connection. Virgo is the mind-body connection or disconnection, depending how that experience is showing up for you, right? And the Pisces energy with the Mercury, Neptune, as I mentioned earlier, there can be some confusion at the moment around what you're seeing, around your perspective on matters. So take a step back and certainly don't, well, I can't say don't, but my suggestion would be if you had to sign any legal documentation, contractual agreements, you know, today or tomorrow, I would avoid that totally. Okay, I think I'll leave it there. That's really all I wanted to say about this full moon, which I think is more than enough to get us to understand, you know, the cosmic energies at this present moment, you know, today and tomorrow, really. Next couple of days. Those asteroids being square that moon, and by the way, they are square the sun as well. So, you know, because we have a full moon, sun opposite the moon, Juno is also square the sun, Ceres is also square the sun, Ceres is square the moon, and Juno is square the moon. So what we actually have in a matter of fact is we have what's called a grand cross, all right? It's a mutable grand cross, because we have the 4 mutable signs. Sag, Pisces, Gemini, and Virgo are the 4 mutable signs, and this configuration is called a grand cross. So we have this full moon in a grand cross with 2 very powerful goddesses, very powerful asteroids, which have so much to do about our own sense of self-worth, our own sense of feeling equal in partnership, and our voice and our ability to be able to communicate that. So this is all tied into this full moon. It's a little bit complex. It's not very easy. Ceres is always associated with loss and grief, separation as well. And we've had, you know, Saturn and Venus conjunct, which is also about separation. And Venus will conjunct Pluto, which, as I said, can be the death, the ending, or it can be a total regeneration, metamorphosis. It just depends what's happening for you in your own life. Okay, so I'll leave it there, and I wish you all a happy full moon in Virgo, even though, you know, it's not an easy energy that we're dealing with, but, you know, we're all quite resilient. I mean, most of us live fairly long lives, most of us, and we go through a lot of different things. But I think it's helpful to, you know, to have the heads up in this insight astrologically to help us actually find meaning, create meaning to the events and circumstances that transpire, so that we don't feel victimized, or that we don't feel defeated, or disempowered. Discussing these cosmic energies is about creating a sense of awareness, clarity, and a sense of empowerment, so that you can work with this energy, step into it, work with it, and confront the crises as it arises. You know, the word crisis in the Chinese language means opportunity. So it's all about perspective, how we see things, you know. Anyway, happy full moon, guys. Much love and blessings. And see you all soon with something else. And feel free to contact me for a personal reading. I do many different types of readings. Children's charts, you know, relationship astrology, relocation astrology, soul path reading, natal reading, forecast and prediction, horary charts and questions, a number of different things. So please feel free to contact me anytime with any questions you may have. And I'd love to hear your feedback and your thoughts and reflections on what's been happening for you guys, you know, over the past couple of weeks, really leading to this full moon and post this full moon as well. Much love. See you guys soon. Bye.